What if I told you that the uranium in the atomic bombs that ended World War II came from a mine in the heart of Africa, and that 20 years later, jazz musicians would unknowingly become pawns in a deadly game that would claim the life of Africa's brightest hope for independence? The story begins on June 30th, 1960, in Leopoldville, the capital of what would become the Democratic Republic of Congo. The humid African air buzzed with excitement as thousands gathered to witness history. Church bells rang across the city, while drums echoed from every neighborhood. After 80 years of brutal Belgian colonial rule, the Congo was finally free. At the center of this historic moment stood a tall, charismatic man with wire-rimmed glasses and an unwavering belief in African dignity. His name was Patrice Lumumba, and at 34 years old, he had just become the Congo's first democratically elected prime minister. Lumumba's speech that day would send shockwaves around the world. While Belgian King Baudouin spoke of his nation's civilizing mission, Lumumba rose to deliver an unscheduled response that cut through diplomatic niceties like a blade. He spoke of the humiliation his people had endured, of children separated from their parents, of men worked to death in mines and rubber plantations. "We have known ironies, insults, blows that we endured morning, noon, and evening," he declared, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. The Congolese erupted in cheers. The Belgians sat in stunned silence, and thousands of miles away, in the corridors of power in Washington and Moscow, alarm bells began to ring. The Congo was no ordinary African colony. Beneath its red soil lay treasures that had already changed the course of history. The Shinkolobwe mine in the southern province of Katanga had provided the uranium that powered Little Boy and Fat Man, the atomic bombs that devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Now, as the Cold War intensified, this same mine held enough uranium to tip the nuclear balance between the United States and Soviet Union. The Congo also possessed vast reserves of cobalt, essential for jet engines, and copper that could fund any government fortunate enough to control it. But Lumumba's vision extended far beyond Congo's borders. He had attended the Bandung Conference in Indonesia 5 years earlier, where leaders from across Africa, Asia, and Latin America had forged a new movement of non-aligned nations. Lumumba believed the Congo could become the heart of a united, independent Africa, free from both Western and Eastern domination. This dream terrified both superpowers, but it was Washington that would act first. In the smoky jazz clubs of Harlem and Chicago, a different kind of Cold War was being fought. The U.S. State Department had discovered that America's greatest cultural export wasn't Hollywood movies or Coca-Cola, but jazz music. The complex rhythms and improvisational freedom of jazz spoke to audiences worldwide, and African listeners heard in it echoes of their own musical traditions. So the State Department created the Jazz Ambassadors Program, sending legendary musicians like Louis Armstrong, Dizzy Gillespie, and Dave Brubeck on tours across Africa and Asia to win hearts and minds for America. The irony was devastating. As Dizzy Gillespie's trumpet soared through concert halls in Accra and Lagos, preaching American freedom and democracy, CIA Director Allen Dulles was signing off on Operation PBSU Success, a covert plan to eliminate Patrice Lumumba. The same government that sent black musicians to celebrate American liberty was simultaneously plotting to assassinate Africa's most prominent black leader. The crisis began almost immediately after independence. The mineral-rich province of Katanga, encouraged by Belgian mining interests and supported by Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, declared its independence from the new Congolese state on July 11, 1960. The company that had extracted uranium for American atomic bombs was now working to dismember the very nation it had helped enrich. Moïse Tshombe, Katanga's leader, became Belgium's puppet, protecting European mining concessions while Congolese unity crumbled. Desperate to hold his nation together, Lumumba made the fateful decision to appeal to the United Nations for help. UN Secretary-General Dag Hammarskjöld, the Swedish diplomat who had transformed the organization into a force for global peacekeeping, responded by deploying the largest UN mission in history. But the peacekeepers were forbidden from ending Katanga's secession, leaving Lumumba frustrated and his government powerless. In desperation, Lumumba reached out to the Soviet Union. Khrushchev, eager to gain a foothold in resource-rich Africa, immediately pledged support. Soviet planes began arriving in Leopoldville, carrying advisors and supplies. For the Eisenhower administration, this confirmed their worst fears. The Congo, with its strategic minerals and central location, could not be allowed to fall into communist hands.
The order came down through CIA channels with chilling clarity. Lumumba had to go. Agency operatives explored poison pills, contaminated toothpaste, and various other assassination methods. The man who had dared to dream of African unity became the target of the world's most sophisticated intelligence apparatus. Meanwhile, African-American musicians continued their unknowing role in this deadly drama. When Louis Armstrong performed in the Belgian Congo in late 1960, just months before Lumumba's murder, his music filled concert halls while CIA operatives moved through the same cities, implementing their lethal plans. The cultural diplomacy that celebrated Black American achievement abroad coincided with the systematic destruction of Black African leadership. The end came swiftly. On September 14, 1960, Colonel Joseph Mobutu, a former sergeant in the Belgian colonial army, who had been carefully cultivated by CIA station chief Lawrence Devlin, staged a coup. Lumumba was placed under house arrest, then captured while trying to reach loyalist forces in the eastern city of Stanleyville. On January 17, 1961, he was flown to Katanga and murdered by Belgian operatives and Congolese collaborators. His body was dissolved in acid to prevent the creation of a martyr's grave. But the tragedy extended even further into the UN's highest echelons. Secretary-General Dag Hammarskjöld, who had grown increasingly critical of Western interference in the Congo, died in a mysterious plane crash in northern Rhodesia on September 18, 1961, while flying to negotiate a ceasefire. Though officially ruled an accident, evidence has since emerged suggesting the plane may have been shot down. Ralph Bunche, the American diplomat and Nobel Peace Prize winner who served as Hammarskjöld's special representative in the Congo, later spoke privately of his suspicions about the crash, though he could never prove foul play. The Congo that emerged from this chaos bore little resemblance to Lumumba's vision. Mobutu would rule for 32 years, renaming the country Zaire and plundering its wealth while serving as a reliable Cold War ally to the West. The patterns established in the Congo became the template for American intervention across Africa throughout the Cold War era, from Angola to Somalia, where superpower competition consistently trumped African aspirations for genuine independence and development. The jazz musicians, meanwhile, gradually awakened to their unknowing role in these machinations. By the mid-1960s, as the American civil rights movement intensified and the truth about CIA operations became harder to hide, many began to question their participation in State Department tours. The same music that had been used to project American values abroad became, in the hands of artists like Max Roach and Abbey Lincoln, a soundtrack for protest against American foreign policy. Today, as we listen to the recordings of those jazz ambassadors, we hear not just the complex harmonies and revolutionary rhythms that captivated audiences worldwide, but the sound of a historical moment when culture, politics, and Cold War espionage intersected in ways that would reshape an entire continent. The music remains beautiful, but it carries with it the weight of knowledge about how even art can become complicit in the machinery of power. The question that haunts historians to this day is simple yet profound. What might Africa have looked like if Patrice Lumumba had lived? Would the continent have avoided the succession of Cold War proxy conflicts that devastated nations from Angola to Ethiopia? Could a united, truly independent Congo have provided a model for African development that prioritized African interests over superpower rivalries? We'll never know, but the echoes of that lost possibility continue to resonate through African politics today, from the ongoing instability in eastern Congo to the continent's struggles with foreign interference and resource extraction. The uranium that once powered atomic bombs still lies beneath Congolese soil, now extracted for different purposes but by many of the same international companies. The jazz that once carried messages of American freedom continues to inspire musicians worldwide. And the memory of Patrice Lumumba endures as a reminder of what happens when the dreams of small nations collide with the ambitions of great powers. If you want to explore more forgotten stories of how Africa and Asia shaped our modern world in ways that traditional histories often overlook, subscribe to History Off the Map. There are so many untold stories waiting to be discovered. Stories that reveal how the centers of power we think we know were often shaped by voices from the margins of the map.